Across the year with our speakers, we've been looking at how glass art has now gone epic and quite large scale. Partly that was inspired by a project with this evening's speaker, Beth Lipman. We're thrilled to welcome her back to Wichita and the Wichita Art Museum. Many of you might remember meeting her, and even if you didn't meet her, you remember her work from our summer 2017 exhibition that we titled Ritual and Desire. Beth's work, I would tell you from a visitor reaction, her work was the hit of the show. Visitors were absolutely entranced, and that summer, our attendance increased over 20% from the 2 years prior, so quite a hit. I'll take just a side note and remind all of us in the room that, we're only able to do exhibitions. We self-organized exhibitions, Ritual and Desire, because people really believe in our cause at the Wichita Art Museum. And that includes all of you as Murdock Society members. As you become members, you're supporting everything that we do, including our exhibitions and programs at the museum. Includes everybody in the room and the handful of people who are joining us on Zoom as well. I also want to give thanks and a nod to F. Price Cussman, because it's part of his generosity that we are able to focus on glass exhibitions and a glass collection here at the Wichita Art Museum. That is a trust that is situated at Intrust Bank. We're great friends with the executors there. And I think Jerry Rowe, who's the person there that we particularly coordinate with, is zooming in this evening. So thank you, Jerry, if you can hear us. Beth Lipman. Gosh, I think she's amazing in so many ways. We did this exhibition with her. We had, as part of our museum strategic plan, that we would commission a large-scale sculpture, hanging sculpture for our entry lobby. And getting to know Beth and being that much more steeped in her approach to her own art making, we moved forward with the commission. Her work is art that marries the past with so many of today's intellectual inquiries within the art world, and I'm eager for you to understand how that happens with her art making, so she's here this evening. The entry sculpture with which we're working with Beth will hang right over here. It will be 14 feet long by 8 feet wide by 10 foot tall. Believe it or not, and I only taught myself that this morning, that's going to be larger than our main Chihuly sculpture, which is right here. It measures 7 feet by 11 feet. So it's going to be even larger than our Chihuly. It will be site-specific, and we're going to learn exactly how that works, but there are ways that she is grounding this work in Kansas, in Wichita, with elements that are iconic from our own collection. And I feel very good about the sculpture, in part because Donlinger Construction, and Tom is here this evening, is helping us figure out the complicated inner workings of how you hang 3 tons from our entry lobby when it wasn't really built for that, was it, Tom? But Tom and his team is really going to figure it out. Beth is an amazing rising star overall in the art world, and with that, she's already gained incredible stature. As we speak, she has her career exhibition survey open in New York at the Museum of Art and Design. She lives in Wisconsin with gallery representation in New York City from Nora Haim Gallery. She's received these honors. She's received a Tiffany Foundation Award, a Pollock Krasner Foundation Award, the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship. She's richly connected with the Pilchuck Glass School, which is outside of Seattle, and that's in the glass world, that really is such an epicenter, so that she's been there time and again, speaks volumes. She has quite an impressive exhibition history, and I'm not really going to go through that. I did just mention her career survey that's in New York at the moment, and a New York critic wrote about that show that it is, quote, a cinematic, seductive affair, and one that, quote, sparks excitement about Lipman's next move. Well, we in Wichita are in a very important spot for Beth's next move. She has work in the collections of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Rhode Island School of Design Museum, Corning Museum of Glass, the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, and we acquired work from her when she had her exhibition here in 2017. Super excited for all of us to get to know better Beth Lipman, but also the project that she's doing for us here in Wichita. Beth, the stage is yours.
Hi. I am so thankful to Patricia, the staff, the board, and you for inviting me, not just tonight, but truly believing in my vision in the past work, in the present work, and in the very near future work of living history, which will soon hang literally right in the spot to your right. Sorry, that's kind of lost for the Zoom members that are listening into that, but so thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your support of contemporary and historic art. It really does make the Wichita Art Museum one of my most favorite museums in the country. It's a phenomenal collection and exhibition, really. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. It means a lot. So I am standing on the grounds of the traditional lands of the Wichita, Kaichi, Waco, Talvaya, and Tawakani people, and I pay my respect for elders both past and present. Okay, so I am located, as Patricia mentioned, in Wisconsin, Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, to be exact. I have been in Wisconsin since 2005, and I moved to Wisconsin after completing a residency called the Arts Industry Residency for the John Michael Kohler Arts Center and Kohler Company in 2003. I was working in arts administration at the time, and I took the position to oversee that particular residency in 2005, and I actually moved to Wisconsin, although I was born in Philadelphia and raised generally in Pennsylvania. This is my house and my studio. I have a very short commute, about 10 steps, so I have absolutely no excuse to get to the studio at any given time. In my studio, I do a variety of different things every day. One of the first things I do when I walk into that studio is make sure that the kilns are firing. So the work is very process-driven, but almost more importantly, it's very conceptually driven, and I do a lot of research in this space as well. So a lot of prototypes are made, a lot of experimental kinds of components are built, as well as at any given point, if you happen to come visit, you'll find it kind of drastically rearranged because I usually end up working on several projects at one time. Although I have to say that living history is truly, and I am not blowing smoke at this point, the only project that I am fully 100% working on at the moment. So when I have limitations, and they do come up, such as scale or technique or materials, I do work with others. Here you'll see me at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington with Gabe Feenan, and on the right at Pilchuck Glass School with Jen Ellick and Josie Gluck. So I really enjoy working with others. I love incorporating their mark making and their sensibility into the actual, the final composition. So in some ways it's a lot like choreography, even though I'm also making the majority of the components in my own studio by myself. There are many times where I do need to work with others, and that is, that's really a necessity in this particular practice. So, On the left, you see Still Life with Fruit by Severin Rosen, and on the right, my interpretation, Still Life with Fruit after Severin Rosen, that was completed in 2000. And this work is the first still life, direct still life that I completed. So a little over 20 years ago now. The still life genre has continued to inspire me, and I don't believe that I will be finished with it in my lifetime. It is such a broad discipline that it really holds the possibility of exploring a wide swath of things, whether you're interested in symbolism, you're interested in medicinal, theological, belief systems. It's a sign of status and wealth at certain times. And these objects are always, first and foremost, really surrogates for the individual. So in the Dutch Golden Era, at the very beginning of what's codified as the still life genre, the inanimate objects, both food and otherwise, came to the foreground for the first time. So the figure disappeared, any kind of narrative that these inanimate objects were supporting, they were in supporting roles prior to the 1600s, they became front and center, and all of that meaning actually remained. So for me, when I think about creating in still life, I think about it as an exploration of material culture, and also, as importantly, they are portraits of ourselves. They're portraits of an individual, they're portraits of society, they can be also portraits of institution. So that has been my focus for quite a while. The work juxtaposes different points in history. History is a huge, huge driver of my work. I understand this point in time by juxtaposing this point in time in different points of history, and not necessarily just human points of history. History pre-human, prehistory as well. The elasticity of time is something that I'm very much concerned with in my work. The porosity of time, the compression of time, the expansion of time. So all of this is somewhat relayed in the still life tradition, but becomes kind of pushed to the real forefront in my work. So those are just a few words. We're going to go on. This piece is called One and Others. It's at the Norton Museum of Art. It was finished in 2011, and this is an example of a predecessor of living history and the way that I tend to work now. It's a composite portrait of the Norton Museum of Art, the institution itself, because I chose certain things, which you'll see in just a minute, from aspects in their permanent collection. It's also hyper-local. The museum really sits literally right next door to a cemetery, which you'll see. And it is also a portrait of myself. So within that work, there were aspects of botanical illustration of the pineapple plant, because in fact, not only does the museum sit next to the cemetery, it in fact sits on part of the cemetery. There is a settler's grave, which I'm not supposed to talk about. So just keep it to yourself, okay? Just keep that to yourself. Underneath what was then initially the auditorium of the Norton Museum, and one of the only graves that was actually marked, which was of Richard Hone, who was a pineapple grower who unfortunately met his demise with a homicide. So the whole thing, I'm just going to go back for a second, is scattered with pineapple plants, and then there are objects that reference not just the paintings themselves, but the absence of the human or the individual. So I'm constantly kind of removing the individual, but implying us through the objects. So I just want to show you like the painting beneath the sash that the child is holding the goat with is actually scattered kind of over one another's as well. This is sideboard with blue china. The work is also almost always rooted in the narrative of domesticity. I use aspects of our interiors, the things that we surround ourselves with, to really paint these portraits. I use period rooms. I love the construct of period rooms and the idea of defining who we are through this artificial construct. Does everyone know what a period room is here? They're curated spaces that are typically found in museums of an idealized form of an interior of different points in history. You don't actually have any here, but it has influenced my work quite a bit. In addition to those period rooms and actual interiors, I also use furniture quite a bit in the work. The furniture becomes really important because of its anthropomorphic nature. The furniture becomes body. It is named after body. We sit in it as well. We utilize it. We come to it. It's utilitarian, but it also is literally an embodiment of us. So in this particular work, which is just one example of how I've used furniture, but in a very kind of explosive way, if you can imagine. This is about 26 feet long. This combines refrains of human predation with aspects of the human body. So within the sideboard itself, you will find depictions of organs, lungs, heart, brain, stomach, intestine. There's also limbs, and that's combined with things that we desire or we use or we consume. So this is almost a shrine to us, the body, in the way that we manifest things externally and also what manifests within. The title, Sideboard with Blue China, is a nod to Oscar Wilde's quote, "I find it harder and harder every day to live up to my blue china." And there's a longer conversation there, but not for a 40-minute lecture, so. A few words about a piece called One Portrait of One Man. I was given the great honor to create a response work to the Weissman Art Museum's Marsden Hartley collection. So there's Marsden Hartley on the right and the Weissman Art Museum. It's, I think, the largest collection of Marsden Hartley in the country. And the dialogue with the museum, which was incredibly inspiring and very fruitful, ultimately took several years to get to a point where we really understood what the direction forward would be. And sometimes it just takes that time. It's about those relationships. It takes time to understand location, space, narrative, as you all know. And I have learned, even just from being here in Wichita several times, like every single time I come back is such a huge wealth of information that I'm constantly, I have my radar out so that I'm constantly kind of pulling in and sifting and processing information. So Gertrude Stein on the left, and an inspiration for the piece, One Portrait of One Man, which is an allegorical body of Marsden Hartley. And within this piece, encapsulated, is his portrait of Gertrude Stein called One Portrait of One Woman. And she, in turn, wrote a word portrait of Marsden Hartley. And I do have to thank Patricia McDonnell again, because your research and your scholarship really afforded the inspiration directly to kind of arrive at the manifestation of this work. So thank you again for your really tireless work in that way. So as you can see, the glass cabinet does become the allegorical body. And within that cabinet are representations of artifacts. They're primarily from the Beinecke Library at Yale that hold a really large collection of Marsden Hartley's artifacts as well as Gertrude Stein's artifacts. So they're all found within. And they're actually not so available to you as a viewer. The only entry points are in the heart and the pelvic regions of this particular cabinet. The drawing that's flanking the cabinet and the painting is actually an aerial view of no man's land, which was the trench warfare from World War I. And as some of you may know, Marsden Hartley was greatly impacted actually by World War I and amazing American modernists. So I really wanted to kind of visually illustrate some of the ways that his life was defined through forces outside of his control. This work for me really does offer a rumination on presence and absence. And this way of kind of controlling the amount of information that you can have at any one given time, that's like allegorical for memory also, right? What can we access? What can we tap into? What do we hold? What do we let go? So this becomes really important. Because I'm using transparent material, I can kind of tease you a little bit about what is possible and what is available. It becomes important in the work. Some of you might remember seeing this. This was in Ritual and Desire in 2017, which was really a phenomenal show. Laid Timetable of Cycad is actually the first large-scale exploration of deep time in my work. And it was generated through this amazing series of articles by Elizabeth Colbert that landed in The New Yorker in 2006 called The Climate of Man. And it was all about climate change. And as we know, there were whispers about climate change prior to 2006. But her investigation and subsequent articles just really impacted me, and I immediately started to hyperventilate, basically. And I realized I really need to find a way to incorporate a language that's going to communicate with you what's happening in this moment in time for us as a species and also for all species. So I started looking for that information. And of course, you can find everything in the still life if you look long enough. But I thought initially, I'll start doing a lot of floral still lifes. And maybe I'll incorporate flora from the last age of global warming. Well, I did a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, and I asked the paleobiologist, Scott Wing, who I was working with at the time, can you show me examples of flora from the last age of global warming? And he showed me the fossils, and he said, this is the flora. And I said, it looks exactly like what's in my backyard. And he was like, oh no, the veination is totally different. And I was like, I don't make veins in my work. I am a generalist. This is gonna be a problem. So that led me to think, what is a more universal way of talking about time, deep time, geological time, time passing? And I arrived at this vocabulary of ancient flora, which is specifically early, it's considered a visually similar flora, even though, the original plants might have been wildly different within on a molecular level. The plants that we see outside, such as conifers, cycads, moss, lichen, they look the same. And not only do they look the same, they are actually ancestors through the first 5 mass extinctions of our Earth. So these plant forms, for me, are very much about the kind of persistence of life. They symbolize the persistence of life. I mean, it's devastating. 99 point, I don't know what the point is afterwards, but truly 99% of all living things have already become extinct. It is really miraculous that we're here at all, in any sense at all. So, this kind of language can talk about the persistence of life, but it also kind of hopefully triggers some maybe subconscious understanding of a stereotypical kind of paleo landscape that you might find when you go into a natural history museum, which I could talk about at length, but those things are all also, evolving scientific belief systems. So every time I go in and I find the most amazing image of the Devonian epoch, I'll go and I'll talk to a scientist and they'll say, it did not look like that. That is totally wrong. That's what we thought it looked like 30 years ago. So I was like, I wonder what it's going to look like in 30 years. So anyway, so now I will say this, the cultural objects that are part of these still lives are really markers of this moment in time with us, the age of the Anthropocene, the age of the human. So yes, they're specifically about Western culture, and they can be read, but they are very much about being human, right? So now it's a juxtaposition between prehistory and the age of the Anthropocene. Hooray! Okay. All in all, this is a very recent exploration with a similar focus. So in this case, and this is important, I want to share that in these cases, you'll see that the table remains. That shred of domesticity is remaining, but the table also becomes about time and stratigraphy. So it's domestic, maybe overblown domestic, but it is also about what comes after, what came before, what is above, what is below, what is interior, what is on the outside. And that really is very much being utilized in living history, which you'll see shortly. Let me try again. Okay. Similar concerns, different materials. These, at least some of them, you'll also see in All in Time, the solo exhibition that will open here in June, where I'm using these. You are looking at photographs. Obviously, they're photographs, but they're images of photographs. So I have a series of work where I actually take objects and I really bring them out directly into the wilderness and I document them there. I photograph them, and the photographs are scaled to the actual size of the objects. So these are actually quite large chalices. They're about 4 feet high. And I really love this series because it is the human through the vessel, and it is also landscape. So it's portraiture, landscape, and still life. So all of the canons of art history are found in these photographs. Now we've gotten very small, so I have to talk in a whisper so Zoom people cannot hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. This is the Distill series. Same kinds of concerns. Ancient flora, conifer, moss, lichen, ferns. Ferns weigh heavily on my work. I'm sorry I didn't mention ferns. I hope they'll forgive me. Combined with cultural objects, architectural details. Basically, composed in Amazon boxes, essentially, and then invested in sand. And molten metal is poured into that investment, and the work is simultaneously destroyed and created at the same time. So this work really mimics geological processes. They're almost like fossilized moments. And that is another aspect of the way that I work that is really quite important, is using every process for its conceptual power as well. So all of the processes, even when I'm working in glass, for instance, hot glass, you have a very limited amount of time that you can create something. It can fall, it can break, you can heal it, you can choose how to react to every single moment, but it is really a metaphor for life practice in that way. I think this work has some relevance, so I'm just going to share it because I just completed it. It's called Wild Matter, and it is for Art Preserve, which just opened in my hometown in Kohler, Wisconsin. And Art Preserve houses the John Michael Kohler Art Center's collection of over 30 artist-built environments. So it houses and preserves these incredible, not just objects, but really environments from artists from all over the world. And I had the opportunity to create an artist-made washroom for this building. So I used, this may come as no surprise, I used that opportunity to also call attention to ecological preservation. So we have the cultural preservation through Art Preserve, and then the washroom itself. The Gallium malugo that you saw, so Wild Matter is actually the common name for that particular plant. So in this washroom, there's over 1,200 flora species that are depicted in clay and glass tile. They're all crowdsourced images, and they're all the species that are found in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. When you walk into the stalls, there are vitrines that illuminate as you walk into the stall. And there's, I know, it just makes you want to stay forever. Or not. The vitrines have slip-cast clay specimen sheets, which were scanned from actual specimen sheets at UW-Madison's herbarium in Wisconsin. And these specimen sheets, so actually I will call note to that process because that process will come around again when we start talking about living history in terms of scanning. Those specimen sheets are of plants that are now extirpated or extinct from Sheboygan County. It's kind of like the end cap. Additionally, the fixtures are applied with a glaze that while it was still wet, we actually utilized the fixture. And so it has the mark of the human hand that is actually fired in and embedded into the fixture. And the glaze itself is a byproduct from Kohler waste labs. So they're reclaiming all of the byproduct from the factory and making the most amazing glazes and tiles. So I worked with them very closely to formulate a glaze that I could use for this. If you happen to make it to New York City before January 2nd, please go see Collective Elegy at the Museum of Arts and Design. Although I will say, some of the works in that collection are coming here in Wichita, so if you miss it, it's totally fine. You're going to see most of it here. So I just want to mention, I'll show you a little sample of the exhibition so you can see more distill on the right. Spenophyllum and chains will be on view here in All in Time in June. And there's some of the, you can see scale, I think, better for Alone in the Wilderness, the photographs. Okay? But this piece in particular, I'd just like to talk with you about a little bit longer. It's called House Album. And even though it's very visually divergent from the rest of my work, you'll pretty much see that the concerns are very much paralleling a lot of the other concerns in my work. It is a selective portrait of the United States that explores issues surrounding agency, identity, and memory. And it was inspired by these little beauties. There is a whole tradition of Victorian scrapbooking of houses. So at the turn of the century, during one of the prior industrial revolutions, there was when print became completely ubiquitous. It was sent out, it was used for advertising, it was a massive data influx that was coming in hard copy into people's homes who had of a certain class. And women and young children would cut and clip these objects and create their own idea of home, and in turn, their own identity through home. So I kind of took that notion and I turned it on its head, and I started collecting objects that would be found in my home, my collective home, my understanding of what has really truly shaped the United States. And this is a living work. Every time that it gets installed, it will be configured completely differently. And it is coming to Wichita all in time. And I will also be incorporating one or two objects that are specifically about this region into House Album. So stay tuned. Also, in that iteration, there'll be James Baldwin's clock from St. Paul de Vence, his last home in France, and among other things. So I'll just keep you guessing what those things will be. Okay, I bet you really want to hear about this now. Living history. We have arrived at living history. The work that I'm creating for the Wichita Art Museum is a large-scale site-specific sculpture. It explores the dual concepts of deep mapping, which I haven't talked about yet, and deep time, to examine a sense of place. Now, I do understand that I am the new person in the room here. But I think that sometimes when we travel and we come into new environments, if we really start to look and pay attention, we perhaps see things with fresh eyes. And so I am offering that to you, the things that I am deeply in love with about this region. And I will also say, well, I'll talk about that in a second, but it investigates anthropogenic impact on the natural world. Same thing that we were just talking about. The tenacity of biota over time, such as in your tall grass prairie preserve, which I am absolutely obsessed with, I will tell you. It has, on top of the sculpture, an encrustation of objects. Some of them are very specific, not only to Wichita, but specifically to this museum, and outcroppings of prairie grass. The undercarriage of the work, I'm considering this now a dividing plane. That's the term I've been using. So it will have something that appears to be very table-like on the surface. And from the skirt of the table down will be an encrusted rock formation as well. So some inspiration. Oh, here's a rendering of it, for instance. I do want to mention that deep mapping is really capturing a sense of place from a multitude of perspectives. It was coined by William Least Heatmoon in Prairie Earth, which some of you may be familiar with, a book which I am really, really enjoying, I have to say. It's really been kind of critical to my research. The ways that the perspectives that we're talking about include topographical, anthropological, literary, and anecdotal histories. And we know a little bit about deep time, because I just talked about that, which, by the way, was also coined by John McPhee in Basin and Range, in case you're wondering where these terms came from. Okay. So, this is what I wanted to say that I held off on saying. But I also want you to know this is really of this time. This is capturing this time. Because when I came to do a site visit with Patricia and the staff, I drove here from Wisconsin because of COVID-19. I did not fly. And I drove through the tall grass prairie preserve. And I freaked out. I literally, it was a very visceral experience. I could feel the earth. This sounds very hokey, and it probably will be, recorded for all time. It's awesome. But it's like I could feel it in my body, the grounding in that space. And I had never experienced anything like it. And as I think Tara and Patricia and Kirk can maybe testify, I was like almost breathless when I came in. I was like, I just drove through the tall grass prairie. And so for me, it was like a no-brainer. And then it was shared with me that it is also, the last remaining uncultivated landscape of the prairie in the world. So it's like complete no-brainer for me to think about incorporating that in the work. So this is actually from my very first drive down several years ago now, and you can see in my studio some tall grass prairie components that are literally sitting on my table at this time. So there'll be 5 different representations of tall grass on living history, on the top of living history, the predominant species that are found in your preserve here. Additionally, and as importantly, night sun. I am a huge fan of Nevelson, huge. And every time I've been here, I stand awestruck over Nevelson and Wilson simultaneously, and it's very difficult for me to kind of move from that location because they both encapsulate so many things that I'm concerned with. So as you can see on the right, there are actually components that will be mimicked from Nevelson's work. Additionally, you just received a really beautiful collection of barber poles, which I was really kind of immediately drawn to them when I first saw them because of their potential to act as a surrogate for the body, for the human body, as well as provide architectural kinds of details. Barber poles, I don't know if you know this, they will be all clear, colorless glass or wood, but the original barber poles go back to medieval times, and barbers also were bloodletters, they were medicinal, they directly were treating the human body. It was not just simply about cosmetics. So the size, the scale of the pole, and the kinds of ways that you can read the finials and every aspect of those poles became very much my surrogate for the body, not just the refuse in the cultural objects. And you may find some of our Derek Porter poles. Kirk, I hear you graciously agreed to give me some extra poles for the work. Is that true? No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. But you may find some echoes of your light field also on top of the work. This is as it stands now in the studio. The wooden structures that you see there that are kind of topographical will be completely encrusted with a self-hardening clay. And they'll be also completely encrusted with grasses. And also the flanges, all of those things. The work will be only clear and white visually when you see it. But just for a little teaser in case you're wondering, and that is also the angle that the work will be suspended from your ceiling at. So as you walk through your entry foyer, it will actually dip down and tip almost as a greeting to you from the front foyer. And then you'll be able to see the work in its entirety as you traverse up the stairs and stand anywhere on the balcony looking straight out as well. I want to tell you a little bit more about those rock formations on the undercarriage of living history. So if you recall the Wild Matter bathroom, when I was talking about scanning actual specimen sheets and then modeling them in clay and interpreting them and putting them directly into the vitrines, I realized at some point in the last year that it would really add a very interesting layer of meaning if I could three-dimensionally scan some actual rock formations at the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. And Larry Schwarm graciously agreed to spend the day with myself and a really amazing man named William Kruger, and who came from UWM, the architectural department, and he is an expert LiDAR scanner. And we took the equipment to Youngmeyer Ranch, and we spent the afternoon scanning Dead Man's Gulch at Youngmeyer Ranch to incorporate that actual rock formation into living history. So this is the site that we went to, and this data forms the skeleton of the rock formations for the undercarriage of the work. So it's literally shaped by nature. This is a three-dimensional rendering of what it's going to look like, but it's also from the files that we're using to print. So just to let you know that that's kind of what you're looking at. So anyway, that is what I am so pleased to share with you. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer any. Or someone on Zoom, perhaps, too.
I don't see any questions.
No questions. Okay, thank you. Questions? Yeah. The question is, what are the materials of House Album? And thank you for asking that, because I failed to tell you that. It is made of vinyl and glass, half-inch. It's really 2/4-inch thick sheet glass with laminate prints in between them. And there's also solid sculpted glass objects and metal. It's actually, I think of my practice always in drawing. It was a glass drawing.
Okay.
Sorry. It was a glass drawing. So I really love the interface between pattern, wallpaper, drawing. So of course, wallpaper locates it within an interior. So a lot of times I start with that location and then things transform or morph into something else. But in the case of the one portrait of one man, which is I think what you're talking about, I did reference it as a drawing, and Sideboard with Blue China also had that. But I cut pieces of sheet glass and fuse them and then glue them to the wall. So they are essentially drawings. I use color rather sparingly, and I know a lot of people ask about that. And for me, it's very much about distilling the essence of the object in question to more of an idea. Additionally, when you look at colored glass, depending upon the qualities of that colored glass, it can stop your eye optically. And clear, colorless glass allows you to see through the work, see the work and see through the work, and have reflections back at you, so that you can never visually own the objects or the composition entirely that you're seeing. So it's a way of not giving you everything. The question was, where is sideboard with blue china? Is that the one? Okay. Yep. Sideboard with blue china is located at the Ringling Museum of Art. Also one of my very favorite, incredible museum there. Yeah. So that's where it is now. So everything, when I'm creating the work because of the material concerns, I really have to think about how to transport it even before I make it. This is what separates professionals from hobbyists, is like, how do you transport it? So I always build in such a way, which basically means that I'm building in components that can be easily taken apart and cavity packed in foam and crates and boxes, and then installed on site. So the installations themselves become rather labor intensive for that reason. The question was, will I comment on how it's been so far? How it's been, how it's going, the meme. I will say, once again, just great question, Jeff, in terms of looping back and expressing my gratitude at the belief and the trust that the Wichita Art Museum, its staff, its advisors have placed in my process and the practice and my vision. It has been really quite wonderful working with the Wichita Art Museum. And even before this project, Living History, and I said this to Kirk, this is not going to be a surprise, but just a complete joy to work with this particular museum, complete professionalism, hardworking, and then also the level of support for such a complicated work. I mean, this piece has never, ever been, I've never hung anything from a ceiling like this before. So it takes a village, let me tell you. It's taking a city, actually, to a certain extent. So I think that it's been a great learning experience, and I'm grateful for the experience. It's been really fabulous, and I am left with nothing besides being like pressed for time. Like, I got to go right now, actually. But other than that, like, I have pure joy when I go to build the work because I've had so much support from the museum. So, like, if I have a structural question, I know who to go to ask that question. And so it's like that. I mean, it's been really a delight. Yeah. The question is, why Living History? Where did the title generate from? And, a lot of times when I'm thinking about title, I think about words. I read a lot. A lot of my inspiration, specifically about history and otherwise, I read a lot of poetry, come from reading, come from literary art. And so I usually in my title have a way of implying something that is not just merely descriptive. And I really like the kind of the known understanding of what living history means. We think of like living history museums like Williamsburg, or these constructs of sometimes house museums or living history. And it really is about this construct, this belief system that we all collectively share about a sense of place or a period in time. So I feel that living history really is reflective of those concerns. It's a continuing, growing living history, and I have been graced to add to that, hopefully, as well. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you, Beth. Of course, I think all of us now have gathered when people come to the Art Museum at the end of March, when this piece will be finalized, right, Tom Donlinger? I think the first sense is just awe and, oh my heavens, this incredible wonder that's hanging there. And we know about the ideas that are going to be embedded in it, and we know about the location and cultural specificity that will exude from it. So really thrilled that Beth shared this background with you. You also have a sense of just how amazingly complicated this piece is. We've been pestering her with all sorts of questions to know that it's structurally secure, and all will go well for this work over decades and decades and decades as it graces our beautiful Boeing foyer. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Beth, for coming and sharing with this wonderful patron group that we have in Wichita. I think you saw on our slides before, our final Murdock mixology for the year is November 18th, I believe it is, and it's the super artist Ed Carpenter who created that wonderful, huge sculpture that hangs in the airport, who's going to come back and tell us what he's been busy doing since that piece was completed when the airport opened. So thank you all, Murdock Society.